Hi. As long as you're on that topic, I
Yes.
just wanted to mention there was a wonderful lady her name is was Shoshana Axler, who was the principal of the Hebrew school at the Ezra Habanim in Northbrook.
I
I,
remember. I remember seeing her name on one of the doors there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and she even crossed over to when they moved in together with those other synagogues to form Northbrook Community Synagogue. So I was thinking about it today that like if you like if I'm reflecting back on teaching opportunities that I had that at the time I thought I was doing out of duty. Um, that was one of them. What happened was we had I think we moved into their building. And as part of the deal for moving into their building, I agreed to teach in the Hebrew school. And the there like of all teaching situations, the one I imagine to be least fruitful is teaching in a Hebrew school of a synagogue. Just by design, they are a circumstance which is least likely, in my view, at least at that point, to bear fruit.
That sure was my experience when I went to Hebrew school.
And I think it would be true of most people that were in them.
I was a
So
dropout.
and to me, teaching at a Hebrew school would be, again, this is what I imagine. Teaching at Hebrew school would be some kind of penance that a person would have to do for some sins of youth or from a previous life. And but the worst of all situations would be to be the principal of one of those Hebrew schools. So she just passed away like 2 days ago in a very untimely way. She was living in Israel. She moved to Israel. She was single. I'm not sure why she was single, but she had been single for a while. She had children that lived in Israel. And so for the last few years, at least to many of us here, she was finally getting to live out a kind of dream to be in Israel near her children and grandchildren. And then she felt these stomach pains, and within a few days, she died. Apparently, it was pancreatic cancer, which but she died immediately, like from complications of it, and it was very surprising and very sad. So the thing was, she took it so seriously and tried to do a good job. And looking back at that, there were several kids that were in that school, which I continue to have a connection to, who've grown up and have, sort of vibrant Jewish families. Um, the the person who told me about it was one of the students in those classes, and to her, Mrs. Axler was a like a formative part of her Jewish life. She's a frum young lady who lives in West Riders Park and she just got married a couple of years ago, and they have a baby girl. And she's like, anybody who sees her and her husband would think of them as part of the bright future of the Jewish people. And she looks back at her as like the single most formative person in her development, and those years in that Hebrew school as the most formative part. It's how we still have a connection. And so it was one of those things where I thought of it as some kind of duty I had to perform, some kind of penance. And when I look back at the experience, it was one of those things where you would say, like, if I was only here for that, it would already be, it would already make sense. And anyway, she was sort of the figurehead of that thing. So while we are all mourning everything else, all the terrible news about the hostages and Hirsch, I just wanted to mention her because she deserves mention. Okay, and now we are on to this. Also, while we're finding this, our place in the Rambam, just because I need to be reminded of this, that while blame, it's the tendency of people during this time to find blame with people, we do have to remember that Hashem is ultimately behind all these things, which is a.
So you're saying we should blame Hashem?
I'm saying that we should direct our emotions. We shouldn't ignore him. Let's just put it this way. Shouldn't ignore him in this, right, because he is behind everything. And whether it's blame or our sense of pain or our sense of responsibility, shared responsibility, we shouldn't ignore him, blame it all on these things are not simply the work of people. They are, behind it all is Hashem.
We blame him for giving Hamas free will.
Well, I mean, this is a complex story, and Hamas is not. I mean, anytime you can quickly discover and blame it all on somebody else, it's useful to, just as an exercise. I'm not saying we don't know all the workings of everything, but it's a useful exercise to figure out how I'm to blame for what happened, because I can, again, in a case like this, it's so hard to believe that any of us could be to blame, but it's a useful exercise to try to find how I might be, because I can't necessarily change those forces outside of me, but I can, in theory, change myself. And if there's a lesson for me in this, I need to take the lesson. And like, again, for me, I've been thinking about even before October 7th, we talked about this, I remember, on the Thursday morning after Yom Kippur, I remember that we talked about the terrible Yom Kippur that happened in Israel and the fighting between Jews, and how it just for a moment became clear to me that if I don't take responsibility for my part in how that all happens, nothing is going to change. And so, for me, my work since that last Yom Kippur has been that there is no them, there's only us. In other words, that this is in all regards, that somehow we are all interconnected, and so when good things happen, we all get some credit, and when bad things happen, we all get some blame. And that if I don't look inward when these things happen, then nothing's going to change. And then, October 7th happened. It was very hard for a few weeks after that, not to be filled with anger directed towards the outside, but it sort of was nagging at me even then that that this is not an exception to the rule, and that I have to see how I'm, what role I have played in this, and that if something like this could happen, there was, this is a lesson for me too about my own contribution, and especially when something like this happens, that it's easy, not just easy, it's almost like self-preservation to find somebody else who I can blame for this. And so there, a boogeyman will be blamed for it, but it's we're all interconnected. We're all interconnected, and that means that if we make changes in our own life, it affects everybody else too. And this this isn't just one person's thinking or one person's decision making, or a few people's thinking or decision making. We're all interconnected, and we all, just like we're all sharing the grief as if it happened to us, I have to understand that the answer also, I feel it as one heart. So that means that I'm also where the answer lies, and I have to see what I contributed, and then do tshuva.
Is that you're saying in a way a sense of guilt? I mean, if of ourselves, and unless everyone feels that way, it.
No,
Do you
but
see?
I don't mean it so much to,
You see what I mean? I feel guilty that their pain right now is a million times more their parents there than my pain, even though I'm feeling pain for them, and that brings on some guilt in me.
not the
I don't
same.
know.
I'm saying what I'm suggesting is more pragmatic, not just the emotion, but it's more pragmatic. What I'm saying is that I'm working on a theory, and because of the theory, I'm led to, if I had to ask myself, like, what is the low hanging fruit? Where is the low hanging fruit? Let's say I'm being very pragmatic. Like I imagine what happens if accidentally I was made a mayor, like sometimes we're driving on a road trip and we pass through a small town, and I'll imagine what happens if I was accidentally made the mayor of this town? What could I do that would make the life, or help to make, as the mayor, help to make the life of the people in the town richer or happier or better? I actually have these, like, sort of daydreams. And I'll think about, well, I might start with the high school. Maybe we could find funding for more after school programs for kids, or fix the little league fields, or I just start, like, you and you're the way my thought process goes is find what is the lowest hanging fruit. Or let's say I had somebody said to me, here's $1 billion, spend it on whatever you want to spend it on. So I imagine the lowest hanging fruit first. Like, what's the thing that everybody agrees needs work, and then and people believe there's something realistically you could do about it, and then channel the money towards those, maybe sort of like what Jeff Bezos's wife is doing, or something like that. So it's a similar kind of thought process. Let's say I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this situation, and I want to pragmatically respond to it. Where is the lowest hanging fruit? It's me, because I am working on the assumption that we're all interconnected. I'm feeling it, because I'm feeling, you're right to point out, I don't feel it just like his family or his friends, but I'm feeling it as if it happened to me. So that, to me, is support for the notion that we're interconnected. So now, if it works, like Rav Nachman Abrasov says, if you believe you can knock things down, then believe you can build them up. It works. That channel goes in two directions. So if we're all interconnected and something is wrong, then if I want to work on what's wrong, then it can work from me too. In other words, if I make myself better, then it's in the same network. So, and realistically, pragmatically, I'm the for me, I'm the low hanging fruit. The likelihood I'm going to change somebody else is so remote, even somebody who's close to me. And then how much exponentially more difficult would it be for people that are not close to me? And so, so if I'm the lowest hanging fruit, I'm where it should start. And so it's like a twist on Gandhi's thing. Maybe Gandhi even meant this, I don't know. But it's a sort of twist on the thing that is attributed to Gandhi, where he said, be the change you want in other people. Apparently, he never really literally said that. He said things like it, but that's how he's often quoted. But this is that I could really be the change. In other words, if I change, we all change. So if I I am the low hanging fruit from my perspective, I'm the one that really I have a chance to do something about, even though it's unlikely. I still have a chance to do something about. So therefore, it needs to. That's what I should be focused on. Again, this is not grieving. Grieving needs to happen, and guilt is a part of the process. There's of grieving, but I don't mean that. I just mean from a more pragmatic, kind of proactive place, that instead of using my energy to pick somebody to deflect or direct the anger, deflect responsibility, I can accept it, not just to walk around saying I'm bad. That does nothing. But in other words, to accept it as part of this, which is that a belief that if I work on myself, it helps everybody, and that I can start with something like this because it hurts so much. I can start with something like this, and
but Rabbi, doesn't our religion? I mean, it teaches both. We have to examine ourselves, especially. I guess tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh Elul. Yes, but also confront the evil that's out there in the world. I mean, we can't just look inward.
Nobody's saying just look inward.
Yeah.
I'm not saying just look inward. It's funny because I know that for some reason, I don't know why this always happened. Like, especially like when it has happened to me so many times when I bring this subject up, that I'm beginning to believe that I'm not communicating it correctly. Because I remember after Trump got elected in 2016, so I just sent like a message to friends that God was in charge of the world yesterday, and he's still in charge of the world today. And it infuriated people. It makes it sound like, like somehow if somebody trusts in God, they've abdicated responsibility for everything else in their life. And that somehow I'm communicating that if I look inward, that I've abdicated any sense of responsibility for evil in the world. I don't mean to communicate that, but I can't tell you how many times. Also, for some reason, when I talk about trusting in God, that he ultimately is the provider of everything we have, it makes people nervous that somehow what I mean is that you don't have to try anything. You could just sit at home, and that you could be lazy, that somehow that's what it means. I don't feel like I should that I'm communicating those things, but somehow it comes across. But I don't mean it. I do not mean that. But in fact, it wouldn't happen anyways. Even if I meant it, which I don't, it wouldn't be the end result of it, because we have such a strong pull to blame other people for what's going on. It wouldn't be immediately resolved by everybody looking inside. But but it doesn't happen at all for most of us. It's not even it's like a surprising thought for most of us that this is where our efforts should be. But sitting around being angry at a boogeyman does absolutely nothing. Maybe his family, because they have the attention of the world, the ear of the world, they might have real impact on what happens. But I don't have, or let's just put it this way, the likelihood that anything I would say, if I raged against a particular person or group of people, the likelihood that would have any effect is so slim. But the likelihood, if I spent that same energy working on myself as a contributor to what happened and changing myself so that I am not in the future, the likelihood that would have benefit is way more. And so I'm just sharing that. I am sharing it out loud because I need to say it out loud for my own work. But also, I am putting it out there because I think it would be useful for a lot of us if we at least knew that was an option. Let's just put it that way. This is not the last you will hear about this, because
it's okay.
It's all I can think about right now. So
no,
I'm going to be
think
talking about.
that you're right. I think you're right. It's just it's hard to think about that when you're thinking about, that's perfect. I'm going to do it. Let's hope everybody else does.
No, right. But I don't even if I think that way.
But you think work. Of your inner.
I can't think of other people having to do it. I just have to think about, because if I think this only will have meaning if other people do it also, then
then you lose the effect.
Yeah. I think I have to. It just has to be, working on myself. Not that I'm the only one that matters. It's just that it won't. It gets diminished and diluted if I keep on looking over my shoulder at what other people are doing. So I feel like it has to be just me. I mean, if somebody would say to me, "What are you working on during Elul?" To me, this always would have been to some degree, but it just got way underlined that whatever I think I've benefited from thinking this way since last Yom Kippur, it's not doing much. Now I gotta ramp it up. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so we're in the Navi Sheker, the lying prophet section. Again, according to the Rambam, there is nothing to this prophecy. When a false prophet is speaking about a prophecy they did not actually have prophecy. They didn't have anything related to prophecy. They are characterizing an experience or just flat out lying about an experience as prophecy. They didn't have prophecy. So you have somebody who is out there saying that God told him something, XYZ, and we know that he's a false prophet. Now, again, how do we know he's a false prophet? One of the ways we could know he's a false prophet is if he says that God told him to change the Torah. If God told him to add to the Torah or to subtract from the Torah, then he is a false prophet. So there is some confusion about what Christian, like, let's say Christianity. So let's say there is a claim that Jesus was a prophet. Let's just say, because that is certainly what it sounds like they believe. And that it's hard to parse everything they're saying, but they're claim there's a person who said things, and this person who said things it's interpreted to mean that you don't have to keep the Torah. In other words, you don't have to keep you don't practically, for instance, have to keep Pesach. You don't practically have to keep Sukkot. You don't practically have to keep kosher. So it's interpreted that way. So that would, if there was a person who was saying that, we would know that person is a false prophet. If they're claiming prophecy, if they're claiming to speak on behalf of God or that God spoke through them, and their claim is that you don't have to keep the Torah, we would know that is false prophecy. That is from this last week's Torah portion. That if they subtract from the Torah, in other words, if they would say that there are certain mitzvahs in the Torah which no longer apply, if they say that in prophecy, that's an indication that they're a false prophet. So listening to somebody like that is forbidden. In other words, following what they say. That he prohibited us from listening to one who prophesizes in the name of an idol. This means, now, again, there, I don't know what to do about that. He's saying in the name of an idol. I don't know why he has to say in the name of an idol, as opposed to just we'll see. Hopefully we'll get clarity on it. That he prohibited us from listening to one who prophesies in the name of an idol. This means that we do not investigate him. We do not ask him and say to him, what is your sign? What is your wonder, confirming your statement, as you would do with one prophesying in the name of God. Rather, all right, so this is not what I was just describing a false prophecy in the name of God. This is false prophecy in the name of an idol. So if they say that an idol spoke to them, that alone is an indication that they're a false prophet and we can't listen to them. Rather, when we hear his prophecy, we warn him about it with what is fitting for any sinner and blameworthy one. And if he holds on to his words, we administer upon him the punishment for which he is liable by the Torah. We do not observe that wonder that he gives. We don't listen to any argument from him. The prohibition of his saying, do not listen to the words of the prophet, and the regulation of this commandment have already been explained in the 11 chapters of Sanhedrin and also Parshas Re'eh, which was last week's parsha. So this is not this is listening to a navi in the name of avodah zarah. The next one is just a plain false prophet. That he prohibited us, that we not, in other words, he doesn't want us to be afraid of a false prophet, nor be negligent about killing him, because he prophesied in the name of God. Rather, we should not be afraid about any iniquity in his, but only when his falsehood has been confirmed to us, and that his may be exalted, saying, do not fear him. Do not prevent yourself from arguing his guilt, because some of these people could be scary. They could have an aura about them that they could harm you, because they're powerful and they know all sorts of, they can curse you, or they can do all sorts of things that would harm you. Once you've determined that they're a false prophet, you're not allowed to be afraid of them, which means that you have to follow through on all your responsibilities. Fear is an emotion, and you're not always in charge of the emotions that you're feeling, but you would violate this if there was some action that you were supposed to take, but you didn't take it because you were afraid. So if you're supposed to testify against him and you didn't testify, or if you're a judge in the court, but you didn't follow through on the rulings. So those would be example. And then let's say you're the one who's supposed to carry out the punishment and you don't carry out the punishment. Those would be the place of the actual violation, because that's where you see the fear in action, or in this case, inaction. So it is explained in the Sifrei, and the regulation of this commandment have already been explained at the beginning of our introduction of our composition on the commentary of the Mishnah Torah, Foreign Worships and Customs of the Nations. Okay, so that's the end of the false prophet section. Now, This is a
So that just refers to someone is going to prophesy something that's going to happen or make a change in Torah law.
right.
But I mean, how far does making a change go? Because you can point at rabbis making
Right. So there,
adding,
it's
subtract.
part of the oral tradition. It's also, I mean, there's brief mention of this in the Torah, like next week's Torah portion, which is the authority of sages to enact law for the protection of mitzvos, but to also enact law as part of governing. So they are doing that, but it's always under the rubric of rabbinic law, which, in other words, they have to be careful, and sometimes it's hard to tell the difference, but you have to be careful to not espouse the changing of the Torah, but to make it clear you're acting in your role as leadership or the Sanhedrin, and you're enacting the laws that fit your circumstances and come from your authority. You do have certain authority as the Sanhedrin or as a Beis Din or as a king. You have certain authority to establish rules and laws, but you can't ever claim to that you are adding a Torah law. So let's go back to Christianity, where it's advocating that you no longer have to keep Shabbos. So if you would advocate something like that as a broad thing, that Shabbos doesn't apply anymore, that would be a violation. But what about when the rabbi, and it gets I agree with you, it gets very fuzzy when they say, well, you can't blow a shofar if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. So it ends up that because we keep Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, you're going to end up blowing a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. But the truth, that let's say it was the biblical day of Rosh Hashanah that fell on Shabbos. It could be that biblical day of Rosh Hashanah you didn't blow the shofar. What gave them that authority to do that? That is a big subject, and it deserves being brought up in light of this discussion. By what authority can they take away a mitzvah? And there are times when they seem to be taking away biblical mitzvahs. So there's discussion about it. There's learned argument about it. It is a serious topic that's given a lot of attention. Under what conditions can they do it, and etc. But yeah, so it's when it comes to adding, there by the way, there are, like, for instance, second day Yom Tov, doing second day Yom Tov. So that looks like you're adding a day to Yom Tov. It looks like it, like you're adding a day. It's not obvious for the first day of Yom Tov, but it's very obvious the last day of Yom Tov, let's say Pesach, because there's a whole nother day. Or let's say somebody's sitting in a sukkah a day past when Sukkot is over, and they're making a bracha. I mean, the truth is you don't make a bracha about sitting in a sukkah that day.
Right.
But anyways, those kinds of things, they really do deserve to be discussed, and they are. There is robust discussion about this subject. What is the difference between rabbinic law and adding Another mitzvah. Okay, we can actually talk more about that. I look forward to learning with you guys tomorrow.
So, Rabbi, just something interesting. I've been reading about the disputations that went on in the Middle Ages, and it was so interesting how it changed. It went from talking about whether we were insulting Jesus, and in some of them, to the idea of Mashiach, which that was the Ramban's big thing. It's just an interesting.
Right. It also, each one has to be. You have to know what the rules were.
Right. Yeah, how the Jews were protected, usually by the authorities.
If they were, if they weren't, and what was protected speech, what wasn't protected speech.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It was not a good time for the Jews.
Yeah. No.
Not good. Okay. All right. Be well.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.